about birds, bird watching, and nature conservation, and his experiences in all of these. Here is Sheshadri K.
Thank you. Good morning. Am I audible without the mic?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Cool. So before I begin with, thanks Sunda for the nice introduction. Good morning to everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to thank BNG Birds as a community for encouraging me when I was a young kid. I started out bird watching way back in 2001, and it was my mom who looked at a newspaper clipping that said every second Sunday there's going to be a bird watching event at Valma. There used to be announcements in the newspapers back in those days, and I was going to learn about bird watching by myself, and I said, okay, I'll go show up and see what happens. And I met Prashant, Krishna, and a few others who went on to become my colleagues as well. I became their colleagues. And today I'm going to talk about bird watching in general, but I will also try and include some of my experiences. It is not meant to be a travelogue of my Southeast Asian trips or anything, but the traveling around in India and in Southeast Asia gave me two different perspectives, and I'll try to bring about the differences and similarities in my trip. Who else? Are you going to? Okay. So Wallace talks about this in his book, The Malayan Archipelago in the mid-1800s. I'll let you read it and try to feel what he wrote. He's talking about a bunch of islands that are between Asia and Australia and how they're located near the equator and they're hot and humid. And that's pretty much where I ended up living for a PhD for the last 4 years. Next. Unless everybody is gone. If you couldn't have already imagined the landscape that Wallace was talking about, the big map here is Southeast Asia. It's showing Indonesia, parts of Malaysian Borneo, Sulawesi, and parts of Papua. By and large, Indonesia and the map. He wrote about this place, his experiences as a... Is that me? The sound? Okay. If you haven't read the book, it's available online in PDF scanned copies. Please do read it. It's a great book to read. Next. This was Wallace. He had a love for beetles and birds of paradise. Much of what we know about birds of paradise from the Indonesian archipelago of Papua and the New Guinean part comes from Wallace's work. Wallace was also this famous other guy who came up with the idea of evolution by natural selection. Charles Darwin is the one we read in textbooks, but it was Alfred Russel Wallace who independently came up with the notion that species can evolve over time, and that through natural selection. There is a lot of debate about Darwin having scooped Wallace's work, but recent evidence, they've traced back letters and conversations they both had. It turns out that Darwin didn't really scoop Wallace's work, just that Wallace's work took time to reach the proceedings of the Natural Society, and Darwin's letter was read first and then Wallace's was read second. So in that case, the theory is put to rest, or the debate is put to rest. Next. Moving on, I would like to start with this quote by Confucius, and incidentally, Wallace landed on the shores of Singapore in the mid-1800s on a British company ship. And he talks about how Singapore was already destroyed and there was nothing to see for miles around in the downtown center. To me, when I went to Singapore, this was the landscape that I encountered. And everybody, some of my colleagues, when I was going to Singapore, they're like, dude, you study wildlife, you're going to Singapore, there's nothing there. Why do you go there? And I initially was a little naive and I said, no, I'll go take a look. And then I landed in Singapore, this is what I saw next. And the moment you step there, the buildings will overwhelm you, but then there are these other fascinating creatures that are out there. You can next. This is like the Reticulated Python that's found pretty commonly now in Singapore. A few years ago it was extinct, locally extinct, because of large-scale destruction of forests, but the Singapore Zoo has made some conservation efforts and they've reintroduced these birds, and they've managed to come back. They fly across from Malaysia. These are another example of birds that were extinct 40 years ago, and now they're back in good numbers. This is the pipe period vision, and you can see them very commonly inside of building complexes where they have trees. That's a great thing about Singapore. You can have a fruiting tree on the 8th floor of a 25-story apartment, and birds actually use them. They're not the trees that we plant here, for example, which are for shade or which are for flowers. These trees are functionally useful. And as you step outside into the little pockets of forest that are in Singapore, by the way, Singapore is about as big as Bangalore is, 700 square kilometers. It's an island. I was going to show a map, but it was too much. I'll let you do the homework. Singapore has a large chunk of forest right in the middle. It's called the Central Catchment Nature Reserve. That's where they get all their water from. Before that was conserved, they used to get it from Malaysia. And so now they have their own water source, which comes from this small pocket of forest. This is a forest-dwelling snake that's found in Malaysia, Southeast Asia, and it's a coral snake. It's venomous, but it hardly bites anyone because it's too thin. The snake is about as thin as my little finger. Singapore also has a lot of wildlife, which has survived despite of all the human activities that are there. This, for example, is a mouse deer. If you know the Indian shepherd, the small mouse deer, that's the smallest deer that we have in India. And incidentally, the Sunda mouse deer is doing well in Singapore. They seem to be in isolated pockets. Nobody really knows what is happening with them. Do they move around? I don't think these guys swim across to Malaysia, but there are elephants that do. There was a case where an elephant from Malaysia swam to Singapore and people in Singapore freaked out. Recently, there was also a Malayan Blue that turned up near the Singapore airport. And the only way it could have gotten there is it swam across the causeway, which is about 200 meters wide. It's that close. Next. And you also have, as you step out to these areas at night, you'll see a lot of these interesting fauna. This one is a wine snake, the Southeast Asian version of a wine snake. They look very similar to what we get in India, and maybe it is that in India people kill snakes and in Singapore they don't. These guys are super common. And people there have seen, like in India when I've encountered snakes in public or when somebody is holding and showing a snake to someone, people tend to freak out. And in Singapore, what struck me was that people don't get scared. They are like, okay, he has a snake, they mind their own business. Unless, next slide. Okay, I'll come back to the snake story in a minute. This is again a bioluminescent fungi that we accidentally found in the forest. It's pretty cool stuff. These are things that people don't go out to look at in Singapore as well. The passion for nature is quite stagnated. There's a small community that does outreach, a small community that goes out bird watching, but by and large people are not really aware of what is in their own surroundings. For example, even students in the undergrad, we teach them natural history and ecology, and a lot of them know about hummingbirds, a lot of them know about hippos and giraffes, but they don't know what's there in their own backyard. Next. Unless the snake happens to be a reticulated python, which is sitting in your toilet. This is the Singapore's largest predator. It's the biggest vertebrate that's there on land. It grows up to 15 meters long and they weigh about 80 to 100 kilo. One of my colleagues, I was lucky enough to work in a lab that does herpetology, and they were doing this project on radiotelemetry of snakes. One of them was the reticulated python, and it so happens that it's such a big public issue. These snakes turn up in people's toilets or in swimming pools, and the people freak out. They call the National Parks Authority. They have something called AVA, Animal and Veterinary Agriculture thing, and they rescue these snakes and then they give it to the zoo. The zoo has a team of vets who put in a transmitter inside the snake, and we used to go release them without people knowing that we were releasing snakes. And the idea was to track about 60 pythons and see what they do and where they go. And within a few days, we realized what they were doing. They're using all the stormwater drains that are super common in Singapore. If you have a cat and it went missing in Singapore, you know where it went. It went into a python. And if you are building a construction site or if you're anywhere near a construction site, that's where these snakes turn up, because there are a lot of rats and these snakes love rats. A lot of times they're just sitting in parking lots under cupboards and in stormwater drains, and we would get weird looks when we would go with these antennas and try to see what's going on. So that's the reticulated python that's managed to survive really well in Singapore despite all the disruption. And you have all these cute little primates like the Sunda Slow Lorises. which again in Singapore is hardly studied. In Indonesia, there is a lot of research on this species. It's prevalent in pet trade. You can see videos on YouTube about people visiting Southeast Asia and petting these lorises, and it's a very horrific thing that's happening. People in Indonesia don't really care about it so much. In Singapore, it's restricted, but sometimes you do have pet trade, these things coming through in pet trade. This was one incident where we were looking for pythons at night, and we saw a shine up in a tree. I thought it was a civet. We ran close, and then it turns out to be a loris. They're about as big as the Indian slow loris, but a lot more fluffier, and a little slower, if you think of it. And then you have this other fascinating mammal, which has a unique evolutionary history. These are called flying lemurs. They are not lemurs as they don't fly. Lemurs are what you get in Madagascar. The technical name for them is Kulugu. They belong to a group of animals. They have their own family. And among all the mammals, these guys evolved much before the lorises evolved. And in relative terms, they're really old. And fossil evidence, a little fossil evidence that is out there shows that their skull shape, their behavior, or their morphology in general hasn't changed over the last couple of million years. And these guys are diamond dozen. If you go to Singapore, drive into a parking lot, you'll see them. The big animals, they carry their little ones in their belly and they incline. They're like our flying squirrels in India. And one of the biggest success stories for Singapore, I would say, is the reappearance of the otters, smooth-coated otters. Singapore had the main river, the river Singapore, which went through the city, and it was destroyed completely for a while, until after Lee Kuan Yew came in and they started rehabilitating the river. And by then, all the otters were extinct. And for a long time, nothing really happened. There were fish, there was everything going on, there was pollution. Now that everything is stopped, people started seeing these otters coming back, I think from Malaysia. There's no other landmass nearby. These guys have come back, they've established their territory. You can go to downtown Singapore. The image that I showed you of the road passing through, if you go there, you'll see otters. They'll be crossing roads, they'll be walking across people's gardens. And they've also gone and eaten a lot of people have these koi fish, really expensive fish in their home gardens and stuff. And these guys go and knock them off. And people they've not come to hate these guys so much as yet. But we don't know. And there's a big group in Singapore that's trying to protect them and study them as well. Moving on, changing gears, this was Singapore. I started looking around what's around Singapore because you're a student, you have some free time, they give you a scholarship, you can have fun a little bit, not too much. So I was fascinated as a kid growing up, wanting to go to Borneo. I'd seen pictures of it, I'd watched it on National Geographic, I always wanted to go to Borneo. And this was one poster that kind of stuck my attention. One because it was depicting Borneo as a really wild place, and the other was the actor happened to be a Bigfoot, who also happened to be a supervisor of mine. They both shared the same name. David Bigfoot was my supervisor. David had worked a lot in Southeast Asia, especially in New Guinea, and he would tell me stories of adventure, and I would get goosebumps whenever I heard of them. And then eventually I got an opportunity to go to Borneo, and this is what I saw. Yes, there were crocodiles just like what was in the poster, so it wasn't too far for me to connect. This was along the river in Kinabatangan. It looks scary, but this was a little crocodile baby. I tried to show it that way. But otherwise, the rivers are quite serene and they look nice. They're quiet. You don't see much of activity. If you go in the morning, it's very misty. And this is how they look from when you're flying into Borneo. This is a river called Papa. They call them Sungai. And these are meandering rivers that originate a few hundred kilometers away in the tall mountains, such as the one you see in the next picture. This is Mount Kinabalu. This is the tallest peak between the Himalayas and the mountains of New Guinea, if you geographically place them. This goes to about 4,000 meters, and it does have a unique geological history and local scriptures in that area, the tribes who live there. They have some historical records of there being glacier on top of this mountain. They talk about ice sheets that were shimmering on these mountains and stuff, and it makes it a fascinating read. Mount Kinabalu is also a World Heritage Site. It's protected in the sense really well protected for Malaysian standards. Logging hasn't yet got there, and neither has oil palm. And I'll show you some more pictures of this landscape and what kind of wildlife you see. If there are people, there are seats here. If you guys want to come up. Let me pause for a minute. Next slide, please. This is how the forest looks like. This is from the base camp where you start your ascent to Mount Kinabalu. It's a very nice trek. I haven't done it myself because it was expensive. You need to book a few months in advance. It's a proper trekking route with, you need to take a guide, the whole shebang, everything is included. And what fascinated me was that this place is really, really well protected. They actually take their stuff seriously. They protect the forest. They make sure people don't go off trails. You're not supposed to go catch birds, collect plants, anything. They're very serious about it, which is probably how it survived through the ages. Moving back to the rivers, this is one such example of the Kinabalu. It's very quiet and peaceful, and unlike in India, you end up there early morning, it's still very misty, even into like 8 or 9 p.m., 9 a.m. Thanks. Once the mist starts to shift, you'll see hornbills. Not one or two, but hordes of them. This was a flock that was like 20 strong. These are Rhinocerous Hornbills, which are on stamps and coins in Malaysia. And I wanted to see one. And there was a funny incident in this case at least, was we were walking back from a nature reserve. We were on the road to a village, and I was with a colleague of mine, very effervescent person who gets super excited. And I was looking around for birds, she was looking around for birds, and suddenly she shouts that there's a rhinoceros. And there were two poor tourists who were walking on the streets who panicked, and they started running. They thought there was a rhinoceros around, but they didn't know it was a bird. And that's how I first saw the bird, and then eventually I saw so many of them along the rivers. You easily get 4 or 5 different species along the river. I'll get to why they're found only along the rivers in a bit, but this is a black hornbill. It's very common, and they go in flocks as well. This one is a Wreathed Hornbill. Again, these guys go in flocks up to 20, 25 in number. See them only once in that bigger group. Next. And you have the white crown hornbills, which are sort of endangered, and they're lower in number and uncommon. Again, these guys go in flocks about 10 to 15, and they seem to be hanging around rivers. And I think that's because the habitats around the rivers are the only ones that are protected. Everything else is oil palm. So these congregations of flocks might be a consequence of habitat being destroyed elsewhere. And this thin linear strip along the rivers, which is left, is where they end up congregating. And that's also a place where you get ficus trees. There's enough literature about how ficus trees are important. They feed all kinds of birds. They feed all through the seasons, and they're still found along rivers. Along rivers, the other creature that you see is the Proboscis monkey. This was something I always wanted to go and see as a kid. And again, it was super easy. It would be surprising to you how much Borneo is depicted as a place of mystery. You'll land there and you'll see everything in 5 minutes. I can guarantee that, depending on where you go. This was a troop of Proboscis monkeys. They're incidentally known as the Dutchmen in local Bahasa. They're known as the Dutchmen because apparently they have noses like the Dutch, who invaded Indonesia and parts of Malaysia, and they have big pot bellies. The one on the left is the male, and the one on the right, on your right, is the female. The females don't have the bulbous nose; it's only the males that have it. Why is that so? People don't really know. It's not really well studied. They eat leaves. They are like langurs, but they eat a lot of leaves, and especially leaves of mangrove plants, which are hard and less nutrient than other leaves. You also get these other birds like barbets, which you are all familiar with. The similarity of taxa between India and Southeast Asia is striking. You can get to what kind of a bird it is, whether a barbet or a bulbul, very easily. But after that is when you get into trouble. There's so much diversity that you end up getting confused about it. Next. And you also get these rare langurs. They call them the leaf monkeys because langurs eat leaves. And this was a maroon langur that we saw while speeding through an oil palm plantation. Oil palm plantations, I will get to it in a bit, are one of the biggest threats to wildlife in Southeast Asia, or forests in general. And in some places, they have these small pockets of forest left within the plantations. And this was one such glimpse that we got while running through the place. These are uncommon, they live in the canopy and they're endemic to Borneo, the island of Borneo. This is another cool creature that I happened to encounter just by chance. This is called a tarsier. Tarsier is a mammal, it's close to primates, and they're really old and they evolved very distinctly from lorises. Again, fossil evidence shows that they haven't changed that much. Maybe they've reduced in size a little bit, but that's about it. These guys are about the size of my palm. That's the body. That's the body length, and they have a tail about this big. So in effect, the animal is about the size of my arm. And they live on. You can find them in ficus trees, the crevices in ficus trees and strangler figs. That's where they roost. And they happen to move around by jumping from one saplings to another. So not only are trees super important for wildlife, there are these saplings on which these creatures depend. And they need those saplings to hold on to when they move. They generally eat insects and fruits. And again, very seldom seen and less studied. And you have these fascinating insects living on trees. Next. I just show some pictures now. And you have a great diversity of flying lizards in Southeast Asia. In India, you get one or maybe two species, depending on who you ask. But in Southeast Asia, you get around 12 species. And recently, there was a study which compared the shape and structure of leaves that are falling from the trees with the wing shape of the flying lizards. So flying lizards, for those of you who don't know, have these ribs. The rib cage expands into a wing, and they glide from one tree to another. And they compared the gliding patterns and they compared the leaves that are falling, and they found a strong correlation. They suspect that the dracos are mimicking the falling leaves in the forest. And if you've seen a draco glide, it's pretty much like a falling leaf. Next. And sometimes you encounter endangered storks when you're camping. So we were in a campsite along the river Kinabatangan. It's a plane ride away from Singapore, and then a 4-hour journey on road, and then 2-hour journey on a boat. So it's kind of hard to get to, and then these storks are super endangered. They're poached, the habitats are destroyed, and while you're having lunch, this bird turns up next to a campsite. It's called a stone stork. Fascinating to look at. And at night, again, that being a campsite, I think animals have gotten used to the campsite being around. And this was a Malayan civet. It's uncommon. There's hardly any study on it, and hardly people see it. This guy was feeding on all the rubbish that gets thrown off from the camp. Next. This is a Malayan stink badger. It's a unique group of animals, and I happened to see it completely by chance. The camp owner happened to be a friend of my supervisor, and he runs bird tours, and he's like, oh, if you want to go out and look for frogs, go do whatever you want. And I was with two of my colleagues. They were too lazy to go with me. And I said, okay, I'll go on my own. And he said, there's a trail around the camp, about 3 kilometers long. And I said, okay, I'll go take a look. And then as I was leaving the camp, I saw some Aisha, and again, like Sugandhi said, me being me, foolhardy, I decided to follow it. Luckily for me, in this case, it turned out to be this animal. I didn't know what it was. Never imagined to see one. I took pictures, and what struck me was the characteristic smell that it had. It was stinking. And I can now see why it's called a stink badger. It's called a badger because people initially thought that the badgers that you get in India is when you get them. And the skunks that you get in North America end up being related to these guys. So the Malayan stink badger is a species which is the oldest form of a skunk that is out there. And skunks are in North America, badgers are, this guy is in Southeast Asia. I don't know how that connection happened, but that's how it is. And incidentally, there are no pictures of this animal in life, at least on the internet when I checked a few years ago. There were roadkill pictures, there were camera trap pictures, and there were pictures of them in traps. People post them. But very hard to see a wild animal out there. Next. And we get slow lorises in action as well. This was along a canopy walkway. Malaysia has done this great thing about, again, Singapore, Malaysia, and parts of Indonesia. They're doing good to encourage people to go out there and look at wildlife. And one of the things they've done is they've built these canopy walkways so that people can go out there and look at what's in the canopy. And they do guided tours at night. Of course, you have to pay for it. If you're a foreigner, you pay more. But then you get to go see all these things that are happening out there. And this was the first time I had seen a slow loris in Malaysia, in Borneo. It happens to be a subspecies of itself, and I'm sure with more taxonomic work, it will probably become a different species. Taxonomists will get to it eventually, much to the dislike of last year. These were lorises, and we could see their behavior for about 20 minutes. And we were a big group of 20 people, and it was fun. These guys, so two lorises happened to contact with each other somehow. They weren't calling. And then the next thing we know, they started mating, which is pretty cool behavior to watch if you have seen lorises and studied them. You wake up startled sleeping birds like the Reticulated Python along streams. Next. Or you look at cool things like frogs, which is what I got fascinated with. This one is called the cinnamon dotted frog. It's about the size of my thumb. It's bright orange in color, just like you can see, and it's got these speckles all over them. And the interesting thing that they do is when they get disturbed, they feign like they're dying, or they just flip around and show their antibody. All their legs are stuck like this, and they act dead. I think it's a defense mechanism, but we don't know. Next. And then we have this other cool frog. This is called the Malayan frog, Megophis nasuka, for those of you who know. This is the frog. It looks like a fallen leaf, and there's been enough number of times that I've almost stepped on one looking for it. They have a loud, sharp call. It goes like, ah! It's a very loud call, and very unlike a frog. It's single-noted. You would hear them all over the forest. I was like, okay, what is this? And this was in Singapore. I was assisting the student who was studying it, and she was telling me that there's a frog there, and I was like, okay, where is it? And then I realized I was standing right next to it. The females grew about this big. The males are about this big. Next. And you also get these frogs called these are the, if you know the dancing frogs of India, which have been in the news for a while, this is the original one. These are the fruit-flagging frogs of Borneo. They occupy streams and fast-flowing torrential streams along mountains. And they hang around on the bushes along streams, and they jump onto rocks and they wave their hind feet. When they wave their hind feet, the webbing is open and it's got a white colored membrane connecting the webbing. And they suspected this was to indicate to females that, hey, I'm here, look, I can mate with you. The Indian frogs, they live in similar habitats. I couldn't put a picture here, but they look very similar. They're from the group of frogs called Rhinocerous. Incidentally, they also sit on rocks and wave their feet. And for a long time, people thought it was a signaling mechanism, but then recent research has shown that the Indian group of frogs do it to signal their territories. So they use it to signal to other males saying, look, I've occupied this place, don't come here. And then you have the school frog. It's about the size of the little finger thumbnail of mine. It's called Microhyla bonensis. It's also the frog that next is known to breed inside pitcher plants. Pitcher plants, you know, are these plants that have a liquid inside, and they trap insects. They're insectivorous plants. And in this case, we were able to even look at the tadpole of that frog inside the pitcher plant. The pitcher plants are really short. They're like at short classes, and they're very close to the ground, which is how the frogs are able to hop into it. The liquid inside is bad for insects. Insects get digested, but the frogs seem to be doing fine. And there's also this squirrel in Borneo, which goes and pees inside the plant as well. The plant gets its nutrition from the pee and the poop of the squirrel. This is the other pitcher plant. So what I showed you earlier was the smallest pitcher plant. This is the biggest. This is called Nepanthes raja, which is found on Mount Kinabalu. They grow about a foot long in length, and they're hanging around on shrubs and trees. It's a creeper. Pitcher plants were creepers. I didn't know till I saw one. They spread on other trees, and they have these pitchers in which insects get trapped and they digest them. The other cool thing about Borneo is it would be a shame if you didn't see a Rafflesia. Rafflesia is this big parasitic flower that grows in soil. It doesn't put out leaves. It only puts out the inflorescence. And this is the inflorescence. It is very thick and leathery. Contrary to the popular notion, there isn't that much of a stink. It doesn't smell that bad. It smells mildly of rotting meat. And there is an insect here, you can't see it, but these are flies that get attracted to dead meat, and that's the ones that come in. Those are the ones that come in and they pollinate the flower. just to give you a size, that's how small they are. There is, I think, based on the current taxonomy, there are 23 species, 23 or 28 between that. Found in Indonesia, Sumatra, Java, and Borneo. That's the only places where you get them, and some of them in mainland Malaysia. Yes. This is another species that we encountered in the Malaysian part of Sarawak. This is twice as big as the flower that I showed you earlier. And again, hardly any smell. They look big. They look fascinating. And there are these flies that are hovering around all the time. The efflorescence happens. They don't know when it happens, so they have forest guards, or the equivalent of it there. They go around on particular trails looking out for these, and they put out markers. And there's even a website where you can know if it's in flower or not, and it's a big tourist attraction. And some of these flowers happen to be in such forests that are still intact, not really destroyed, and supports a great deal of wildlife. This is something that is not about birds. Very clearly, I've said bats there. I was going to ask for a guess. This is in a place called Gunung Mulu. Gunung means mountains, and Mulu is a place in Sarawak. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and rightly so. It's dominated by karst rocks and limestone formations. The forest that you saw in the previous slide, those are the kind of forests that clothe these areas. But underneath those forests are limestone caves, and the biggest cave out there is about 27 kilometers long. So somebody actually went in and measured it, and there's a river flowing out of it. It's that big. And in that river, the big attraction there why people fly to Mulu is to look at these bat caves. In the next slide, I think there's a video. If you click on it, it should play.
Click on the play button. What is
Oops. You want to stop and do the... It's in the drive. So what happens there is by evening you're asked to congregate at one place, very close to the entrance, and you stand out there and you'll suddenly, I'll let you watch it. Those are bats. I forget the species, they're about this big. If you get a closer look, wingspan is about this big. And you can see millions of them, like literally millions of bats flying out. I've never seen so many bats all my life. It's just fascinating to be there.
And is that actual?
Is there a reason for
This
this
is the actual
wave
speed.
formations?
This is the actual speed. I'm not fast forwarding. Yes, there is a reason for the wave formation. I don't know if it's in the video, but there are these birds called bat hawks, which are specialized to take these take these bats. So they wait for it. So by 6 o'clock in the evening, when we go there to look at these things, the bats also congregate there. The bat hawks congregate there. The bats, the bat hawks, and the people congregate there. And when these bats are flying out in this high speed, the bat hawks just sally through and cut through the thing, and they grab one bat at least. It's just, you should go see it. I mean, words cannot describe this. And this happens for about 2 hours at a stretch, and eventually we got bored and left. It's that much. It's constant pouring out. The fun thing was the next day we went inside the cave in the morning, and we had to take showers like 3 times that night to get rid of the smell. There's so much bat guano inside, and there are creatures. It's so dark inside, by the way, that there are these invertebrates like centipedes that are bioluminescent. They move around in the dark, in the guano, and they feed on cockroaches that come to feed on guano and the bats that fall down and all that. Inside the cave is an entire ecosystem by itself. And alongside these bats, you also have these edible nest swiftlets, which build nests there. And unfortunately, okay, maybe it's good or bad, I don't know, but in parts of Malaysia and Indonesia, the nest of the birds is used for making soup, and it's a big delicacy, and people go harvest it big time. So much so that it's a small-scale industry. If you go to any town in Malaysia or Indonesia, early in the morning you'll have these tall buildings with sort of towers. You can see the towers have been added there artificially, or added late after the building was built. And you'll hear swiftlet calls all day through. And for a long time I was wondering why are swiftlets calling, and I couldn't see anything up in the air. Turns out that people actually promote playing these calls inside the buildings, So that swiftlets get confused to thinking that it's a nesting site, and they start coming and building nests. They come in, they build their nest, but then people harvest the nest and supplies the industry. I'm sure it must be having an impact on birds, but nobody is really quantifying. And rumor has it that if you, at least in Chinese medicine, if you eat the soup that is made out of the swiftlet nest, if you're pregnant, your baby will look really pink and red. I haven't tried it, I don't know.
You can't get children.
This is an example of the cave. Again, they also have these stalagmites and stalactites inside, and they put in a lot of effort to make it look good, and there's informative manuscripts, or not manuscripts, there's information material out there. Thanks. The other big thing you must see, or you will see in Borneo, is this thing called the orangutan. It comes from this word called orang hutan. Orang is a person, and Hutan in Bahasa Melayu is a forest. So these guys, the Dayaks, the native tribes there, they consider these orangutans as forest humans, and you can tell that they're human. They're so much like us. If you see them in the forest, it changes you as a person. You see another great ape, just like us humans, out there doing similar things like we do. This fellow, for example, was just chilling, afternoon siesta. Next. While his two kids, I don't know if they're his or hers, but these two little imps were playing around, throwing sticks at me. And this fellow, particularly this guy, somehow got pissed off with me and threw a branch at me. When that failed to hit me, he started peeing on me. That's when I ran. So and then I went back and smelled the pee. Didn't smell anything like human pee. So I know it's gross, but biologist. That's something that you will. It's unlikely to encounter an orangutan in the forest, but if you do it, it is a life-altering experience. Any of the great apes, apparently. I haven't seen the gorillas or the chimpanzees. I've seen gibbons, and again, it's a little bit of a changing experience. Moving on, I think I'm running out of time, am I? This is something that I want to go back and revisit Wallace. I started off with how Wallace started his journey in Singapore, and this is a bit of biogeography. Bio meaning biological, geography meaning geography. There's a lot of wildlife, or a lot of biology, animals and plants, have distributions that are very distinct. And we have the Oriental region where there's a particular group of animals. We have the Australian region where we have a particular group of animals. So Wallace was one of the first guys who hit upon this, or he observed these things. And he said between this small two islands of Bali and Lombok in Indonesia, there's a small narrow strait about 200 meters wide. But it's a narrow, I don't know the numbers, but it's a very narrow strip. You can see Bali on the other side, and you can see Lombok, vice versa. What happens there is, along this imaginary line, all these are imaginary lines, there's no line there. Until here, until the edge of Bali, you get parrots. And then after that line, you get cockatoos. So that's one example of a Wallace's line. There's no difference in plants. You still get Gloriosa superba, for example, in Bali. You also get them in Lombok. So a lot of Sterculiaceae plants are common right through. Some of them are even found in India. And what's unknown till now is why this pattern is happening. The jury is out on it. There are a few hypotheses that explain why this is so, but crossing this line was another big thing for us. I know Srinivas has done it. There might be a few other people in this room who have crossed this Wallace's line. It's like this epic pilgrimage you have to take as a biologist to go do it. Next. Once we cross the Wallace's line, you see a completely different landscape. This is in the Indonesian archipelago of Flores. This used to be a Dutch colony for a long time, and a lot of people there have Dutch names. Our guide was known as Bartholomeus, which is really odd to hear in Indonesia. And we were there, of course, looking for the Komodo dragons. The next slide. This is generally how the landscape is, and this tree incidentally also appears on David Attenborough's documentary where they show the Komodo dragon. If they fly over it and all that. Next. Komodo dragons are the biggest dragons. I'm sure you've all heard of Douglas Adams talking about this in the Last Chance to See. If you haven't, go back and listen to it. I won't do justice to what he has said. So, long story short, we went to Komodo looking for these dragons. again, the journey there takes you 2 flight trips, boat ride, that's about half a day, and then you walk for half an hour. You land on this place. They have boats saying, "Welcome to Komodo," and they have these cement Komodo dragons sitting on them. It looks kind of hideous, but when you get there, 5 minutes into it, you'll see a dragon. You're like, I kind of was let down. I'd read about this place so much and I'd imagined so many things about this place, and you go there and it's like 5 minutes you'll see 10 of these Komodo dragons. They're very common close to where the human habitation is. Apparently people used to feed them in the earlier times and they've gotten used to it. But these are big lizards. These are big monitor lizards. And you'll see them roaming across through the landscape. And if you go into the forest, they do have forests. They look like our dry deciduous forest, the scrub jungle. If you go to Bandipur, it sort of reminds me of that, the dry plains of Bandipur. And you'll see a Komodo dragon in this picture. If you look closely, there's one sitting like a log here. And that's how they are in the forest. So when I was in the human settlement, I was like, okay, let down. And then you go into this forest and it's like the guide is saying there's a Komodo dragon there and you're like looking for it. You won't see it unless it moves. And these guys have this ability to, I don't know why they do it. I think it's to look for prey or look for territorial cues. They suddenly stand up, they kind of stand up on their front legs and they just freeze. They don't move, they don't even do the tongue flick. And if you're walking past it, then you might be in trouble. Next. The other thing they do is they dig these burrows. These are big burrows, and it's about this. What you see in the picture is about half the size of this room. That's how big these burrows are. And there are these birds called the metapods, which we also get one species in India. We collect, right? These guys lay eggs in the Komodo dragon burrow circle, so they kind of cohabit the same cavities. I remember the guide telling that they do it in different seasons, so they're not there together at the time. And Komodo dragons being lizards, they also dig to lay their eggs. That's when the megapods come in and deposit their eggs as well. This is how the landscape looks like. It's got beautiful scenery. It's scenic anywhere you step on that archipelago. And again, you'll see the difference. You'll see cockatoos there instead of parrots. You'll see, instead of sunbirds, you get the Australian something bird. Like a sunbird, they call it differently. And this was a sulfur-crested cockatoo, an super endangered species largely because of pet trade. And you'll regularly see news reports of people in Indonesia getting caught trying to smuggle these parakeets out, cockatoos out in really horrific conditions. Some of them, they shove them in plastic bottles and close them. Some of them shove them in their socks. All kinds of things happen. And they stick 20, 30 of them in their suitcases and try to smuggle them out. And these guys, if you go to Komodo, they're doing fine because it's largely protected. Thanks. So moving on to, I've kind of painted a good story so far, and I'll get into the bad part of it. Is everything all right? Is wildlife doing fine? Of course not. Thanks. This is something that was written in 2004. Unfortunately, Sobhi is no more, and the scenario has got only worse since when he wrote it. They talk about how much biodiversity is going to go. 42% of the biodiversity is supposed to go extinct by 2100. And I think we have already reached that number. I might be alarmistic a little bit, but nobody really knows. And they talk about how there's not enough research in Southeast Asia, and how there needs to be interaction with different kinds of people, the stakeholders that are living out there. Some of the issues that we see there is, the biggest one is oil palm. I don't know if it's clear at the back, but this was from an image while flying into Borneo. All you see on top is the forest, good old growth, tall emerging canopy forest. The canopy reaches about 40 to 45 meters there, up to 60 at times, 60-meter tall trees. And suddenly you see this demarcation line where there is just oil palm. All of this is oil palm, and you'll see acres and acres and acres of it. If you're flying over Borneo, that's what you'll see. If you're driving in Borneo, you'll end up crying. There's so much oil palm there, you'll get bored of it and you'll not want to go anywhere further. So the best thing we do is fly on, despite its own ecological impact. They cut down forests, they continue to do so. This was a fresh clearing that we saw. It was a few months old. They chop down the old growth forest, they burn it down, and then they plant oil palm. Oil palm takes about 17 to 20 years to mature, and They give you a lead for about 20 more years after that. And they harvest the palm stalks, or whatever they're called, and the whole thing goes to make oil palm, the palm oil. And it's found in everything from plastic things to any food that you eat that's not vegetable or fruit. Any processed food, you would get oil palm in them. It's such a big thing, nobody really knows what to do. There's a lot of talk going on about it. There is an international round table on oil palm and all that, but what they're trying to do is make, just like we're doing with coffee here, they're trying to make oil palm plantations wildlife friendly. But again, what are the odds? You've cut down such complex forests and you have oil palm there, which is one species, and trying to promote wildlife within that. It's a good try, but I don't think it's the solution. The solution would be to look for alternate sources of oil. Oil palm, like when I was growing up, palm oil was just in the market. Okay, I'm close to finishing. Okay. So that's oil palm. They burn down forests, and if you've read in the news, Singapore gets stuck in the haze every year. The haze comes from burning of forests from Indonesia, and Singapore points fingers at Indonesia. Indonesia points fingers back at Singapore. It's everybody's. Yeah, so the big companies that allow people to burn these forests are based in Singapore, and nothing really happens. And I was there in Singapore once when the haze was really bad and they shut down everything. Like the whole country was dead, shut down. You couldn't step out because the haze was so bad. You get these masks to wear, but the masks weren't working. It was so bad. And that happens every year. The other big thing is because there's a lot of limestone, you get cement industries. This was in Sumatra. It's a town called Padang. Padang incidentally happened to be an industrial town. The town grew around an industry that was set up, and you can see here that an entire mountain is, an entire hill is just shaved off to make cement. And this was the company that had all their signposts and everything they had this Padang cement thing stuck on all the roads, which were built by them to transport the cement, which are the only access points into these forests. The other big crisis, especially with birds, is the songbird trade. In parts of Malaysia and Singapore, even Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore, it is a good thing and in Thailand, it's a good thing if you have a caged songbird in front of your house. It's a symbol of a status apparently, and people go out there and catch birds like the shamas, the bulbul, the laughing thrushes, you name them, the chloropsis. The Sumatran chloropsis is one bird that is found only in captive trade, and apparently it's gone extinct in the wild. And this is just one picture. I don't have a picture of my own. And this is how it is. I've seen these places. And every bird that you can imagine is in those cages. Where do they come from? They're wild caught, and you will see more birds in cages than in the wild if you happen to go to these places. This is another big problem: urbanization, buildings coming up and tall structures between in green landscapes. This is my colleague from Singapore, David Tan. He works on birds, and he collects these dead birds that fly into buildings. We call him the David Dead Bird Tan. His job is he does it by himself. He doesn't get paid for it. He's on Facebook, he's on the internet, and people find him. They call him and say, "There's a dead bird, come pick it up." And he goes and collects these birds. And incidentally, all these birds that are depicted here are birds that I've not seen in the wild, but I've only seen them in the freezer. It's such a sad thing because many of these birds are migrants. They're flying through Malaysia to Indonesia, and Singapore acts like a filter, knocking off all the birds. And this one, the broadbill, it used to be found in Singapore. Recently went extinct. There were 3 sightings of this bird and 1 call recorded. I heard once with David Tan while we were birding, and incidentally that bird turned up dead. It was extinct, so it's trying to come back, and then it's dead. So this is a big issue, including the fishing group. I believe see that flew into a building, the Marina Bay Science Building, if you know where it is. So yeah, that's one of the bigger issues that are bothering Singapore. Photographers and features. I can't say enough about them. I should say I also am a photographer because I carry a camera. This was a case of a mountain peacock pheasant. We were up in a mountain in Peninsular Malaysia, and that's one of the few places where you can see this bird. We were out there, we wanted to see the bird, the lab that I work with. We were 24 students, 24 big, and including students, professors, everyone. And we wanted to see the bird, so we went up there super early. On the way, we stopped at an army camp, and then every shop and bought tarpaulins and everything. We reached before sunrise, sat in one trail where the birds were known to move around, pitched tarpaulins, covered ourselves, made a little height, and made openings in the tarpaulin and everything. Got stung by 100 mosquitoes, hadn't eaten, hadn't had coffee, nothing. And we were in pin drop silence. We waited for 2 hours. Sun came, sun went, everything changed, and we still didn't see the bird. So while we were doing it, as is fashionable or as is a accepted procedure there, you play back calls. You play back calls to attract birds. And we were also doing that because that I was told that's the only way you can see birds. We played back calls of this bird, nothing happened. And then eventually we got tired, we quit and left. And then we ran into a group of photographers, 4 of them, who came at 10 o'clock. They got out from an AC vehicle, they got on happy. And I was, so did you see the bird? They're like, no, we didn't see it. They laughed at us and they went in. We were having our snack by the car, and 20 minutes later they come back all looking happy and looking at their cameras. And we asked them what happened. They're like, oh yeah, we saw the bird. And like, how? We waited for so long, we didn't see it. And this guy was like, so what did you do? We sat quietly in a tarpaulin. We put a hide and we sat there. Like, yeah, that's what you're doing wrong. These birds are so used to people being there, photographers being there. Unless you say the words Canon, Nikon and throw some food and stop, the birds won't show up. And this is no joke. This is no joke. It gets real. So we were like, okay, let's go try it out. So we went back, 20 people, sat bang on the train. And we were having bread and bun and all that. And we sprinkled a few crumbs around. And we just sat there talking about life. And then boom, this bird comes up. It's like, that's crazy. People, you travel 1,000 kilometers to go see this bird, and it comes up when you say the word Canon and Nikon, or by can it be? This is one. The other aspect to it is the playback of calls. We have done this thing where we play back calls with an owlet when we go on lab bird watching trips. Owlet being a predatory bird, the other birds get scared and they come and attack the bird, attack the speaker. And sometimes the bird, the owlet itself turns up. And that's again a big impact that we're having. The other big thing, especially this is the Singapore case, is people do nasty things. These are educated people, well-meaning enthusiasts. The top left is this guy who was baiting a tern chick. He caught a tern chick, he tied a string around its leg and pegged it to the ground so that the mother comes in and feeds it and he can take pictures. On the other side is a doctor, he is a medical doctor, who was filling live fish. He would catch fish, angle catch fish, and then fill it with air and styrofoam with a syringe. Air with syringe and shove styrofoam in its stomach and throw the fish back so that the fishing eagles would swoop down and pick the fish up. The fish would float on water and he would get great pictures. People, the bird watching group, the photography group, they're caught him doing it and he got fined and all that. And this is another example of a natural place that is now gone. It was a cemetery that was earmarked to build an apartment and now it's cleared. It's a place called Bidadari. You can see about 50 people congregating around that place, and this was a small yellow rump flycatcher that showed up. It's a migrant bird, it's uncommon, it comes in there and then people go in huge numbers. They throw mealworms, so mealworms are these small insects they use in aquarium fish. They put those mealworms around and then the birds get so used to it, they don't leave. And through the migrant season, instead of migrating, all they're doing is sitting there and eating mealworms, which is calorifically of no value. It's like eating junk food. And these are some of the impacts that photographers and pictures have had. Pictures because there was once a crake that showed up in a Chinese garden. It's called Chinese garden, and it was a crake. And when we were there, we took a lab group there. I met 4 people. One who flew all the way from the United States, the other who flew from Australia, the other from Hong Kong, and I think 2 were the British guys. They flew in there just to see that one bird. So they came cruising through the park. They saw this big group of us, asked us what we were looking at. If we were looking at the crake, we said yes, the crake was out there, feeding on mealworms incidentally. They saw the bird, boom, they left. And it kind of shocks me that it takes so much of an impact on the environment so that people can just go come see this one bird and fly away. Next. So, what can we learn from this? Or why have we fared better in India? Next. There's a couple of. One is the cultural ethos. We inherently believe wildlife is good and we value it. The second is it's inclusive. For example, in Malaysia, the tribes, the Orans, have no rights. They're being bulldozed over, their land has been taken, they're nobody there. And in India, we still recognize people's rights. Oil palm was tried in India, at least in South India, the Western Ghats, it was a failure. I know there are a few pockets in the Northeast where they're trying to do it. I was told by the forest department guy, one of the forest department persons, that it was a failure because accessibility was a problem. As soon as you harvest the palm frond, the palm fruits, you have to take it to processing, and that infrastructure wasn't there in India. And it's hard to get that in place now because of all these rights and legislations. Again, legislation. We have the Wildlife Act, we have the Forest Act, we have so many of these regulations which still prevent people from doing what they want in forests or to forests. We have great presence of watchdogs. Places like Borneo and Malaysia, it takes you 2 days to get there. Whereas places in India, especially, it's a phone call away or it's half a day trip away, and there are eyes out there looking at what's happening. So that really is helpful, and that has, in my opinion, helped a lot in not going the Southeast Asian way. And then we need to learn to keep areas inviolate. Borneo has done it to a large extent because of natural inaccessibility, like Mount Kinabalu, it takes you 2 days to climb, and you wouldn't want to mess around there on those slopes. Those are incidental, but in India we have achieved it through the legislations and people power. And next. Yeah. Singapore especially has this catch line of moving from garden in a city to city in a garden. And they've done great amount of work to bring trees back into Singapore. Singapore was destroyed once, development was the key. They said we'll develop first and then manage our problems later, and they're doing it. And I think India is capable of doing it. There is enough knowledge, there is enough money to do it, and it's just political will that's probably preventing us from going that way. Thanks. So to summarize the whole thing, I talked about all the good things in Southeast Asia. There's wildlife, there's natural landscape, there are people, orangs, tribes, I didn't talk about them. The biodiversity disaster which Sodhi et al. Highlighted in 2004 is already underway, and a lot has changed since Sodhi was around and what it is now. And of course, conservation is a big thing that needs to happen. It's not happening that often, and it should. So I think with that, I'll thank everybody, especially the BNG Birds community for encouraging me all the way through my career. The Avian Ecology Lab in Singapore that I was part of. My family, friends, colleagues, and EcoEdu for giving me this opportunity. Thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Criticisms, comments.
Slide which you put in jellyfish course.
Sorry?
Slide or something which you put talk about.
That was in reference to the snake picture that I showed before. I was comparing how people are tolerant about small snakes like the wine snake. But when they see a king cobra, you do get king cobras in Singapore, or when they see the pythons. And recently there's NTU, Nanyang Technological University. There was a case where they saw a king cobra and a reticulated python trying to feed on each other. If nobody had intervened, I would bet the king cobra would win because it's venomous. But then the AD, the animal authority came and said, people took pictures, blasted it online. The authorities came and pulled the two apart and relocated them. So you do get king cobras on university campuses. They've survived too. They've survived there as well. Yeah, that was the reference with this picture. Nothing to do with this picture. But it's a cool mushroom that I saw. I've seen them a few times elsewhere. Questions?
How bad is the pollution around? Wherever you went, the plastics.
Good question. I don't know how they manage their rubbish there. At least in Singapore, everything goes on to an offshore island where they have a biofilm. So it was an island that was created for garbage. They have a biofilm that prevents the garbage from reaching into water. They take everything there, they incinerate it, they compress it by volume, and they burn it and dump it on that island. That is what happens in Singapore. In Malaysia and Indonesia, I think they just have landfills. And because people don't travel around so much and public passes and whatever, they go in air-conditioned cars everywhere in Malaysia and Indonesia. Petrol is cheap. They literally have their own petrol fields. So they all go with their windows up and nothing really goes out of the window like we do here. So on the roadside, you don't see so much litter, but I'm sure there's huge amount of plastic that goes somewhere, probably to a landfill. In short, this is what I think, but I don't know. I don't know more about it.
How active is group bird watching?
In Singapore, it is sort of active. There is the Singapore Nature Society. They are more active as a watchdog for developmental activities in Singapore. Recently, they wanted, Singapore has these MRTs, the metro lines connecting all across Singapore, right? They wanted to build another line through the Central Catchment Nature Reserve. And by through, I mean they wanted to go under the national park, a few kilometers under. And people were hesitant about it because they had to drill holes to check soil suitability, and that itself would have an impact. Singapore being Singapore, you don't have rights to protest. So it was a very civil gathering that happened. No sloganeering, nothing really happens. You talk to the authorities, you have the same conversation, and they listen to you, they respect you. And they are active more as watchdogs. They brought in a good EIA. They ensured that the damage is limited. But bird watching in general, people tend to go out on their own. There's nothing like BNG birds anywhere. You also get these bird buddies, is that what they're called? We went with one in Malaysia. So they're available, they're local guys, they're available to take you out bird watching. But then you have to give them lunch or breakfast or whatever. They don't charge you anything. Some of them were even nice enough to bring their own vehicles with them. So we got a free ride, go with them bird watching. This was a doctor who was new to birding, but he knew the landscape. And he wanted us, because we were from the university, he wanted us to go with him, and he took care of it. And all he wanted was lunch, so it worked out. So you had a question?
Yeah, you're talking about swiftlet nests. So what exactly is made of?
Swiftlet nests are made of saliva. So these swiftlets produce saliva and they stick it in. It's like a half cup. It's a semicircular cup. It's very soft, and they stick on rock faces up in inside caves and inaccessible places. But then people have over years learned how to go and harvest them.
Over 95% protein.
So
Over 95% protein.
yeah.
And basically, most of these limestone hills, they built very flimsy bamboo ladders,
Yeah.
and people climb up them. And
I didn't show pictures of those things in here. Even when
a
the
lot of
rats
people
are
die falling from those ladders.
If you fall from there, you're dead. Like I wouldn't think twice climbing on those.
So
I would think twice climbing on those things.
Do they harvest active nests or?
Apparently they harvest inactive nests, but
Active.
I mean it needs to be fresh. That's the point. So if there's a chick inside, I think it goes down. Okay. Thank you. That's fun talking to you all.
Sheshadri for giving an insightful talk to start the birthday proceedings on behalf of BNG Birds and Bird. Thank you so much.